Hello, everybody. My name is Gerald Boyne from Amazon Web Services Germany. I'm the head of security assurance. So everything what is related to regulation in Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, this is on my table.
Yeah, my name is Christian Hesse. I'm responsible for data protection at AWS in Germany. I'm also in the compliance department like Gerald. And this is what we would like to discuss or explain to you today. So I will start with some basics on GDPR, really brief basics. So I only have 20 minutes, so I don't have the time to go really in detail or do a deep dive. Then I will explain a little bit how you as a customer or as a partner or ISV could navigate GDPR on AWS. I think that's quite important. And then I hand over to Gerald. All right. Okay. Yeah, basics on GDPR. Does everybody know what GDPR is or means? No? Okay. So GDPR is short for the new EU General Data Protection Regulation. So actually that's the new data protection law in Europe. And although the law is already there, so you can read it, you can look into it, it's only becoming effective next year in May, so on the 25th of May next year. But because there are some changes, so depending on the country we are coming from, there might be some huge changes how you do data protection, how you protect data of your customers. It makes sense to start looking into this now. Actually, so far in Europe, we had local state regulations. So each country in the EU had their own data protection regulation or law. And we had a framing directive on the EU level, which was already giving some guidance, but actually always the local state regulation or law prevails. And this is actually the change we are becoming is that we then from May next year on, we will have a harmonized regulation, a harmonized law concerning data protection in whole Europe. So that means that all 28/27 European members of the European Union have to adhere to the new law. All right, what are some basics? What are some very important topics about GDPR? First of all, to whom does the GDPR, so the new regulation, applies? Very important, to every human being in the EU. So it's not necessary that you are a European citizen. It's just if you are in the EU, then the new regulation applies to you. Very important. And it also applies for all companies or organizations who are handling data, personal identifiable data of a European. Yeah? So even if you're not in Europe located, if you're located in the US or in any other country in the world and you're somehow processing or handling data of Europeans, then you fall under GDPR and have to comply. What's new with GDPR? It has quite high penalties. So if we look to the past, for example, in Germany, we had the highest penalty we have here in Germany is 300,000 euros. This will change with GDPR, and that could go up to 20 million. So of course, that's quite significant, especially for smaller companies. So it's really important that that all companies start to look into GDPR and start to implement GDPR. Of course, but this we had before, there are high hurdles if you would like to transfer PII data, personal identifiable data, outside the EU. That does not mean that the data has actually to flow to a third country and has to be stored there. A transfer is already considered if somebody from outside the EU is accessing this data. This is already considered as a transfer. Yeah? And there are some hurdles or some things that have to be done. And another very important thing is the right to data portability. That means if you're storing data of someone, you have to be able to transfer to port this data. So for example, you're storing some names, emails, phone numbers, etc. Of a person. This person could come to you and could ask, I want this data, please give it to me and delete it. So you have to make sure that your systems, your applications, whatever, have interfaces that you can get this data. So first of all, find the data and find all the data, not only in one database. So you have to be sure where all this data is stored. Plus, you have to have the possibility, or you need the possibility to extract or export this data. Right to be forgotten, I just said it. You also have to delete the data. So if somebody or the data, the person who is storing the data at your systems is asking you to delete that could also be via click through an interface, then you have to make sure that the data is deleted. Privacy by design. That's something new with GDPR, and this is basically a concept, and that says, so if you develop something, if you're setting up something, you always have to have privacy in mind. So if you build a system, you always have to think about areas like right to be forgotten. So if you develop a software, you have to build in functionality that data could be deleted, that data could be extracted, exported, etc. And also a very important topic, and I think it's also somehow challenging, is if there's a breach, the authorities have to be notified within 72 hours. And that's, in that case, a challenge because if you're hosted, for example, in a cloud, there are always two parties. Yeah? So maybe you are as an application provider are not aware that there has happened a breach, but the cloud provider has recognized that there has to be a close relationship, that you will be informed, and as well on your side has to be a process that you then inform the authorities about the breach. So these, as I said, these are some main topics. There are much more topics. So if you're interested and so far don't know how to start with GDPR, I think a good starting point is to look into Article 28. So in the law, check this article because this is kind of a checklist. Yeah? There are many articles in this law, but the Article 28 is basically like a checklist, and that can give you some guidance what have to be considered. All right, let me drink something. So how is GDPR working now with AWS? I don't know if you have seen this maybe in other sessions with AWS, but I think that is our major model, and it's called the shared responsibility model. And what's quite important here is, this is AWS, this is the customer, maybe you. That data, customer data, is only on your side. Yeah? That means you don't see any customer data here on this side. And the reason for that is if we look into the concept, you of course have somehow a data subject. So that's the person who is providing the information. That could be a company, that could be a private person. Then you have the data controller. And we as AWS are not the data controller because we are providing only infrastructure. We are providing compute, we are providing storage, networking, etc. And functionality and features like encryption, like operating systems, etc. But the data of the data subject is actually controlled by the customer, by the person or by the company who's providing the application, the software, whatever. And we are actually only the data sub-processor. So looking into how you could address GDPR, for those who are from Germany, they know the concept, and there are contracts in place or contracts which could be signed between all these parties. So what we did so far under the BDSG, under the German Federal German Data Protection Regulation, was signing a data processing agreement, Auftragsdatenverarbeitungsvereinbarung. Yeah, and basically. Yeah, that's for those who know the German word. And that's basically the same in GDPR. So this is not changing. Of course, the content is a little bit changing, but to be honest, it's quite similar to what we did in Germany so far. And as well, if you're transferring data to a third country, so outside of the EU, you may also consider signing the EU standard contractual clauses. So this is actually the contract which is bringing the high standard of data protection to this third country. Regarding questions, can we really put it at the end? So either we have time or outside, okay? So this is what usually is done between the data controller and the data subprocessor, so you as a customer and AWS. And of course, there has to be some proof that not only from a contractual point of view, the data is safe and secure, but also from a technical and organizational point of view. So that you're using encryption, for example, that you monitor what is happening with the data, etc. And what has been used so far, and I think this is also, or most likely will be the concept for GDPR, there's no final opinion from the authorities, is to prove that through certifications. Yeah? In an international matter, it's especially the ISO 27001, 2717, 2718, and C-5 in Germany, but Gerald will explain this a little bit later. So this is what we are providing as AWS as proof to you that the data is secure in AWS data centers. And then, of course, there's a relationship between the data controller and the data subject. And you also, that's a suggestion, or of course, it's up to you, you also can think about signing DPAs with this, data subject, or get his consent that you process the data, how you protect the data, etc., etc. And you also might consider to have certifications. I think this is becoming more and more important when you're working or your customers are other companies. All right. Regarding DPA, so AWS is offering a GDPR-ready DPA. If you're interested in that, talk to your account manager or your contact at AWS, and they can get you this DPA. I suggest to start early to look into this. Although the DPA will be only effective on the 24th or then on the 25th, best to start now, because it's some legal stuff which has to be looked into it and discussed, and it makes sense to start quite early. All right, so how is GDPR implementation could be done when you're starting with your cloud project? So looking into our model, how to adopt cloud, I think you can implement or GDPR from the beginning. So I think it's not a separate process or a separate project. I think it makes sense to do it in parallel. So for example, if you're looking into workloads you are planning to move to AWS or into the cloud, if you think about who will be the users, is it internal users, is it external users, basically you could already talk or think about the scope and the purpose, because in GDPR you have to define the scope and the purpose, what you are doing with the data. So you cannot just say, hey, I store your data and I do whatever I want with the data. You have to define what you do with the data. And I think that this is a good starting point to already think about the scope and the purpose. When you continue with your project, thinking about security requirements, define data protection controls, all these security measures, that's basically the privacy by design. This is what I explained at the beginning. Yeah. So when you start developing something, always have data protection and privacy in mind, like the deletion, like the export, etc., etc. Of course, very important, and this is a very, I would say, a new concept in GDPR, is the whole monitoring piece. So you're required to be able to report what's happening with the personal identifiable data. So you have to tell the data subject and as well maybe the authorities who had access to the data, where the data is located, how the data moved, etc., etc. And this could be as well done if you're thinking about monitoring, logging, etc. in this phase of the project. And of course, very important, but Gerald will tell you more about this, is the whole audit and certification piece. So as well, that's a concept of GDPR, that there should be, if possible, a strong compliance framework and security standards, and they could be proved by certifications like C-5, ISO, etc. So I think this is, as I said, it's not two separate projects. It could be really done in one project, and I think it's absolutely necessary. And especially when you're talking about or thinking about cloud, where the iterations of the software releases will not be in years, but maybe in months, start to establish these processes, because actually you have to do it again and again for all new features, new functionalities, etc. You always have to think about, if I have this feature, can I delete the data? If I have this feature, can I transfer the data, etc., etc. So start to really this process, not only from a software development side, but also somehow from a data protection and compliance side. To give you some concrete examples here, but these are only some examples. There's, for example, I explained the data portability requirement by the GDPR, Article 17. AWS is providing functionality and technology for that. For example, the APIs we are offering, I think Bertram, so the session before explained a little bit about APIs, so how you could use APIs to get data out of the systems. As well, if you have a lot of data, you may consider Snowball. So these are the storage devices you could bring to our data center. We fuel it up with your data and send it back to you. Or if you have really, really big, a lot of data, you can get the truck. The Snowball truck, I don't know if you haven't seen it, check it in YouTube, it's amazing. Encryption also, the regulation does not say that you mandatory, you have to encrypt, but they say it's a very good idea to protect data. And AWS is offering encryption capabilities here. The KMS system, key management system, the Cloud HSM. Cloud HSM is where you actually control the keys and manage the keys, and as well the server-side encryption. Another example is the data access control, also a concept of GDPR, so that you have to control access to personal identifiable data. And there we have tools like AAM, Active Directory integration. So if you're using Microsoft Active Directory, this could be also connected to our system. You can use SAML federation to secure the whole thing. So there are also tools available to address this area. And as a last area, I explained it briefly, is the whole monitoring piece, where we have functionalities like CloudTrail. I don't know if you heard about CloudTrail, which is actually logging really who accessed the data, what API accessed this data, what person accessed this data, etc. And you can get all this information, actually can fulfill the requirement of monitoring PII access. There are other tools like config, like a new tool we just launched called Macy. This is really going on the document level, really gives you deep insights into your data, into your information. So there are a lot of functionalities and tools available on AWS. And it's also maybe a good idea to think really to move to AWS because of GDPR. Because maybe what you heard, that's not so easy to achieve at your data center or at your premises. At the moment, when you think about encryption, I don't know how many of you have encryption set up in your data center. How many already have extensive monitoring and logging system? So it might be really a consideration moving to AWS to get all these functionalities and to better comply with GDPR. Thank you.
Okay. So some of you know that there is some things you have to prepare when you want to go through a certification. And I want to talk to you about our path to the C-5 attestation we've done last year. We are currently in the process in a reiteration. And we had been focusing on Frankfurt. Well, this is for sure a reason, because the BSI, the German Federal Office for Information Security, stated whenever we want to sell into the public area, we need to have a C-5 attestation. So, and then it is on German ground. So therefore, we implemented the C-5 attestation first time in Frankfurt. But we are hearing from the customer base, well, we are using Dublin, so please go to Dublin, do a certification there as well. So therefore, if we can receive this information from you, we will increase the C-5 radius as well. So Frankfurt, now 3 availability zones, several data centers there. And when you talk to an old auditor, he's asking you, where's the address of this data center? Very old thinking, it is classical outsourcing. So when it comes to certification, very often the certification is not cloud native. With C5, we have that. So the BSI made a good job. They're asking, where is the the region where the data is stored. They accepted that it's Frankfurt. They didn't need to know which street number it is. So therefore, for a cloud service provider, this was a big step. And there are other countries where this is as well happening, in France, for example. Coming to that later. You know that picture. So shared responsibility. When it comes to the question of a certification, it becomes complex. You have infrastructure as a service, and you have platform as a service, and you have software as a service. When you're going through a certification, it's always the question, hey, and what is Amazon Web Service delivering because of the physical protection? And concerning platform as a service and relational database services, whatever, we are offering added value. So therefore, we have to talk, when we talk about shared responsibility, always about the scope: infrastructure, platform, or software as a service. This is infrastructure as a service, to keep it simple. We are responsible to provide continuously, half a year, a re-attestation of PCI, Hipaa. Now with C-5, we have as well an annual cycle about that on our responsibility level. And when you think about using AWS and you want to keep your attestation, your ISO certification probably, you can use our ISO certification as a reference. This works very well. But if you think about offering as well into the public sector, you can use the C-5 attestation of BSI as well. BSI did not deliver the C-5 Cloud Computing Compliance Control Catalog, horrible word, just for cloud service providers. No, it is for cloud services who are provided by an ISV or whoever. So therefore, tomorrow we'll talk about that on the ISV Partner Day, and we touch it here a little bit. We give you guidance about how you can be compliant. Compliant, there is a NIST standard, there is a PCI standard. We can provide you in a best practice solution. There are even technical templates for that, that in case you want to achieve an attestation, you can follow those guidelines. We underneath provide then, let's say, the compliance interface. And when it comes to compliance questionnaire, I'm your contact person in Germany about that. So we are having customer the PCI environment. We deliver PCI DSS. Now we're having a customer who's going through PCI point-to-point encryption on the cloud. This is brand new. Nobody did it before. So therefore, there's a huge development in this attestation and certification logic, because it came from on-premise, and a PCI attestation had been based on, show me the ID of this crypto card, not working in a cloud environment, especially not with the new Cloud SM. So therefore, we need to discuss with the regulator a lot about the regulation and certification processes. In Germany, we have C-5, and really recommend to go through the C-5 attestation. And why? C-5 is just focusing on the application, if you're an ISV, or on the infrastructure, as we are providing for you. It's not on a whole ISMS. So you don't need to go through the whole ISO 27001 logic, scope it down, and as well have an attestation on your organization. This is not needed with C-5. It is very focused, it's very defined, and therefore, if you think about having a quality assurance step in your pre-processing logic about GDPR, do we have all technical measures in place? Are they functional? Are they adequate? I really recommend C-5, and on top of that, TCDP, for example. And you as well can go, as I said, through a C-5 attestation, and there you can reference, during the audit, our C-5 controls for the physical environment, and then your audit can say, well, check, 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 this is already covered by AWS. So there's a synergy for you in this case as well. What is C-5 and why the BSI thought it's a brilliant idea to have it? We have in Germany the Grundschutz. Everybody knows that. And in the Grundschutz, you have this. And once a year, you have to read the tape libraries if they are full functional. In a cloud technology, you don't need that. As well, in the BSI logic, the virtualization hadn't been that easy to receive a Grundschutz attestation for that. So C-5 had been a major development and became really cloud native. they adjusted some of the principles from Cloud Security Alliance, for example. This is a self-attestation where you can say, yes, this is the checklist from CSA, I follow that. And they integrated it in a formal process. BSI integrated that. What I like most is that they put the effort into the discussion as well with ANSI. This is the French pendant to the BSI, and therefore it is, yes, for now, a pure national attestation, but in the future, there might be something like acceptance in between the French and the German regulation about that. There is Institut der Deutschen Wirtschaftsprüfer, IDW. This is, for the accounting companies, a reference how they do their attestation within a company. So if you are not an ISV, but a customer, imagine you are a logistic company, and then your annual accounting is coming up, and they're doing the attestation. They have an accounting logic, ein Prüfprinzip, principles of doing attestations. And here they picked out one very specific thing. This is long-time archiving. So let's imagine you want to have a cheap long-time archive. Currently, if you run it by yourself, it's very expensive. On cloud, with Glacier, for example, it is so much a cost reduction for you. And therefore, BSI included this logic of attestation as well there. And of course, Grundschutz had been incorporated. But what is the real benefit of this C-5 attestation? Dr. Patrick Grete, who is the project lead and let's say the father, the mental father of the C-5 attestation logic, he added, let's say, soft factors. It's data location, as I discussed before. Yes, it is in Frankfurt. You don't need the street. You know which region it is. Service provisioning, how it is provisioned. This needs to be described and tested by the attestation during that phase. The place of jurisdiction need to be checked and documented. Why that? For a Mittelstand German company, to be under the US law might be a problem, a risk. So therefore they need to know that, and the C-5 attestation states it very clear. Okay, this is the standard, it is US law, but you can have as well other options. You need to negotiate, and this will be transparent in that attestation. You will think about existing certifications. Well, this is a formal step, but it's really valuable because when you do your due diligence, you can see, okay, there's an ISO certification, a PCI certification, Hipaa. Well, why Hipaa? Hipaa is not relevant for us in Europe. Yes, but Hipaa is covering data privacy in healthcare in the US, and they are quite picky about that. So I really recommend to look into the controls of Hipaa for who is interested as a CISO or something in those controls. They're really good. Obligation duty for inquiries and the relation towards public authorities, a question we always receive. And there is a declination. We have eine Fertigungstiefe, I don't have the English word for that, of 100%. We provide all services by ourselves. We have co-location provider, this is the building, the bricks, but inside everything is operated by ourselves. We don't have subcontractors for the software, we don't have subcontractors for maintenance, we don't have subcontractors on call. We do everything by ourselves. If you look into the C-5 attestation logic, it becomes relevant why they are asking that, because you have to know the chain of responsibilities. And yes, we are a US company, but if you think about, there is a Mittelständler who wants to compare cloud service providers, he needs to know if at the end, in the third line of support, there is as well a US company. And therefore, I think the idea is quite valid to ask about, and how do we behave? This is tested through the C-5 attestation. Of course, system description is needed to be analyzed. Yes, the BSI made, let's say, a formal improvement place there we discussed, because the system description, as you know, is changing constantly. We develop new services, so what is the benefit of writing that S3 has the following system description? I think that the generic description of S3 is stable over the next years, but the specific system description might be changed over the time. But in general, I like the idea that now you can compare different C-5 attestations from different cloud service providers, and you have really something normative where you can have a checklist and see, okay, here they are equal, here they are different. This transparency, we are always asked, hey, guys, be more transparent. Tell us something about how you're working. This is helping us on a formal way to show to the German. This, especially the question about obligation duties for inquiries, is stated there. Recommendation, if you have an Amazon account, go to Artifact, download C-5 attestation, the report. The current one, I admit, I'm not satisfied with the content. We improved that. So currently we are in the second iteration of the C-5 attestation, and the next one will be much better, much more content. It should be available in November, something like that. Governance. So when we talk about certification, very often we need to have a governance model. And we are providing third-party attestation as C-5 and ISO. I recommend to use the SOC report because there you can see that in the past, perhaps Bertram told you as well about that, that in the past the measure had been fully functional, implemented. Having a certification is saying today it is implemented, and the certification is valid for a year. With the SOC report, you can see that in the last half year or year, it had been functional implemented. And this is as well the way how BSI designed the C-5 report. It is not momentum, it is a past perspective. They look into the last period of time. We deliver this information, and this is orange, pure AWS. Then it comes to the part, it's not that bright, okay, to the dark blue part there. There you can see there is this shared responsibility, a little bit, let's say, broken, because we deliver functionality for you, and this functionality needs to be activated and configured by you. For example, key management. And the KMS system, the Cloud HSM systems, they are tested during a PCI certification. Therefore, you can rely on that the functionality is as good as you need it, meaning we can't access your keys because for PCI, this is the most relevant part. Logging, yes, we provide the log information for you. You have to activate that. But on top of that, the higher on the stack you are, the more is your responsibility. And when it comes to the pure application, a lot of customers still have the application-based logging in a classical way implemented. I recommend that because then your own team in the software development and as well the compliance department are used to that information. So this would be the story about how GDPR and a C-5 attestation can go together. To summarize it, I'm the one who's delivering the technical organizational measures documented in an attestation to the GDPR team.
I think the session is over right now. If you have questions, you can come directly to us or maybe then outside. Thank you.